The House That Watches. Chapter 1. The House That Watches. The house did not greet you when you moved in. It did not groan in welcome or rattle the windows in protest. It simply sat, a tall, narrow silhouette at the end of a lane that no one walked after dark. The neighbors hadn't said much when you arrived. A glance from behind curtains, a nod that died before it reached a smile. You told yourself people in small towns kept to themselves. Still, you noticed how their eyes lingered on the house, not on you. By day, the place seemed almost ordinary. Dust layered every surface, cobwebs laced the corners, but sunlight softened its edges. The wood smelled old but warm, like a library left untouched. You could almost believe the house was just a house. Almost. It began the first night. You lay in your bed, an iron frame left behind by some previous tenant, and listened to the silence. But the silence was never still. The rafters clicked like knuckles flexing. The stairs groaned as though a foot had pressed it down. A door swayed somewhere far away, although you had locked them all. You told yourself it was nothing. Old houses shifted. Wood remembered every step it had ever carried. Still, unease coiled in your stomach as the sounds seemed to answer one another, call and reply, as though the house were speaking in a language made of creaks and sighs. At first, you tried to laugh it off. You even spoke aloud, your voice trembling but light. "Good night, house. Settle down now." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Nights stretched into weeks. The oddities settled into patterns. When you stepped down the hallway, there was always another step, just behind yours, slightly delayed. When you shut your bedroom door, you heard another close, faint and muffled, elsewhere in the dark. One night, you whispered goodnight again, half mocking, half afraid. To your shock, the silence broke, not with a groan of wood, but with something softer, a sound like breath. It was faint, shallow, close. You held your own breath and listened. The sound did not stop. Your pulse quickened. You told yourself it was the wind slipping through the window frame, a trick of your tired mind. But when you let your breath out, you heard another breath follow, half a second late, as though someone lay beside you, invisible, copying the rise and fall of your chest. You pulled the blanket higher, childish but desperate. You shut your eyes, pressed your hands together beneath your cheek, and tried to sleep. The false breathing behind yours matched every inhale, every exhale. And then, closer than your own thoughts, came a whisper. Dry, threadbare, but unmistakably human. Don't turn around. Your body froze. You felt the words graze your ear like a fingertip. You didn't turn. You didn't breathe. You didn't dare. You stayed still until sleep, or something like it, dragged you under. When you woke, the blanket had been pulled down to your waist. Chapter 2. Settling Dust. Morning softened the fear. Sunlight pooled against the warped wooden floors, and the quiet seemed harmless again. You almost laughed at yourself while making coffee in the chipped enamel pot left behind in the kitchen. The house looked different in daylight. Its wallpaper faded but not menacing, its crooked beams more quaint than cruel. You opened a window to let in air, and dust swirled like pale insects in the light. The breeze carried the sound of birds, distant but alive. For a moment, you felt almost embarrassed. Have you really believed a whisper crawled into your ear last night? Sleep deprivation could explain it. You hadn't been resting well since the move. New place, new bed, strange hours. The mind makes tricks of exhaustion. Still, when you stepped into the hallway, your foot landed, and you swore you heard another step echo a heartbeat later. A soft pat, not wood, but flesh. You froze, staring down the dim hall, but nothing moved. Only the wallpaper peeling in tired curls, only the dust drifting where sunlight could not reach. You exhaled, laughed shakily, and forced yourself forward. Houses had sounds, that was all. The rest of the day passed in quiet routines, unpacking boxes, folding clothes, trying to make rooms less empty. By evening, you almost convinced yourself you would imagine the whole thing. Almost. As twilight seeped in, shadows drew long across the floorboards. You made yourself dinner, and as the pan hissed on the stove, you spoke aloud, just to hear a human voice in the silence. See, nothing strange. Just me, some eggs, and this creaky old house. The house replied. Not in words, not quite, but with a muffled thud above your head, as though something heavy shifted across the attic floor. You froze, spatula in hand. The sound came again, slower, dragging. You swallowed, forced a weak laugh. Probably a squirrel, you muttered, though you had never heard a squirrel move like something dragging its weight. Dinner turned to ash in your mouth after that. Every bite was chewed with ears straining, waiting for another sound. None came. Night drew in reluctantly. You considered sleeping on the couch, but the living room window looked out on the overgrown yard, and the shapes of the trees pressed too close. So you went upstairs, one hesitant step after another. The stair groaned, long and low, as if it remembered your weight. When you reached your room, the air was cooler than the rest of the house. A smell lingered, dust, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. You set your lamp by the bed, climbed under the covers, and whispered to no one, "Good night." The house answered. A creak from the hallway, then another. Steps, slow, deliberate, approaching your door. You gripped the blanket, knuckles white, your breath shallowed. For a moment you thought you would see the handle turn, but it didn't. The footsteps stopped just outside. Minutes passed, or hours, you could not tell. Then it began again. That second breath, faint and delayed, slipping into rhythm with yours. You pressed your lips shut, held the air in your chest. A pause. The false breath waited, and then it exhaled, without you. That was worse. You trembled, every muscle burning. The whisper came again, rasping through the dark. "Don't turn around." You nearly cried. But you didn't move, didn't dare. Eventually, exhaustion smothered terror, and you fell into a fitful, shallow sleep. When morning came, dust lay thick across the floorboards, but it was disturbed. 2 sets of footprints tracked across the room. Only one was yours.
Chapter 3. The Voice Beneath the Breath. You did not want to look at the footprints. Morning light only made them clearer, pale depressions in the dust, side by side with your own. They trailed from the door to the edge of the bed, then vanished, as if the second set had simply stopped existing. You crouched low, touched one with your fingertip. The shape was wrong, not a shoe print, not bare skin either. The edges were blurred, uneven, as though the floor itself had sagged under something that wasn't quite solid. A shudder ran through you, and you stood so quickly your head swam. The rest of the day blurred. You tried to busy yourself, laundry, sweeping, rearranging furniture, but the house seemed determined to remind you that you were not alone. A door slammed upstairs while you were in the kitchen. A laugh, faint and brittle, slipped through the vents while you washed dishes. Once, when you glanced into the hallway mirror, you thought you saw a figure standing behind you, too tall, too still. But when you spun, the hallway was empty. By late afternoon, you had given up pretending it was normal. You sat in the parlor, curtains drawn, and whispered to yourself, "It's just the house. Just the house." That night, you stayed awake as long as you could, candle flickering on the bedside table. You thought if you could see the thing, catch it in the act, you might understand it, might stop fearing shadows. Hours passed. The candle burned low. Your eyelids dragged down, heavier and heavier. Sleep took you in fits, and with it came dreams. You dreamed of breathing, not your own, but hundreds layered together, whispering over each other like waves. You stood in the center of a dark, endless hall, and the breaths circled you, chasing one another, echoing your every inhale. Somewhere among them, one voice separated from the chorus, "Don't turn around." You tried to speak, but your throat felt full of dust. The voice continued, close to your ear, though the hall was empty. "You mustn't turn. That's the rule." You gasped awake, candle guttering. The air was colder than it had been when you drifted off. And there it was, the second breath, steady and patient, waiting for yours. Tears stung your eyes. You whispered, voice cracking, "What do you want?" For the first time, it answered. A long pause, then in a voice like wood splintering, "To be seen." Your blood iced over. You clamped your eyes shut, refusing to turn. You remembered the rule, but the weight shifted at the edge of the bed, pressing into the mattress. The false breath leaned closer, hot and damp against your neck. "To be seen," it repeated. You whispered through clenched teeth, "I won't." The mattress groaned, weight sliding closer still. You braced yourself, fists tangled in the blanket. Then, silence. No breath, no whisper, only the pounding of your heart in your ears. You dared a glance toward the wall, not behind you, never behind, but in the window glass, warped by age. You thought you saw a shadow leaning over your shoulder. It smiled.
Chapter 4. The Mirror in the Hall. The next morning, you found yourself avoiding the hallway. It was impossible to forget what you had glimpsed, the warped reflection in the window glass, a grin that did not belong to you. It gnawed at the edges of your mind all through breakfast. Every corner of the house felt sharper, darker, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for you to notice them again. By noon, you forced yourself to face the hallway. The mirror there had been with the house for decades.
Tall, framed in dark oak carved with twisting vines, its surface fogged by time. You had wiped it clean when you first moved in, but it always seemed to gather a film of shadow no cloth could remove. You told yourself you would look, just once, reassure yourself, prove that it was nothing. Your reflection stared back, pale and exhausted. The house loomed dimly behind you, warped by the glass. You leaned closer, touched your own cheek as if to remind yourself you were solid, you were real, and then your reflection blinked. Not with you. A fraction. Too late. You stumbled back, heart hammering. The glass stayed still, reflecting your terror, your wide eyes, but you knew, the timing had been wrong. You left the hallway and did not return for hours. That night, sleep felt impossible. Every creak, every sigh of the house twisted your stomach. You kept the lamp burning, afraid of the dark, but it only cast longer shadows. Around midnight, you heard it, the slow creak of the floorboards outside your door. A step, then another. You pressed yourself against the mattress, pulling the blanket to your chin. The second breath followed, always that faint echo of your own lungs dragging a half-second behind. You whispered into the dark, desperate. Why me? Why here? The voice came low, splintering like dry wood. The house remembers who sees it. The words made no sense, and yet they lodged in your mind like barbs. You clenched your fists, whispered back, I won't turn around. A pause, then a sound. Laughter, soft and brittle, as though the walls themselves were cracking with amusement. At last, exhaustion pulled you under. You dreamed of the hallway mirror. This time, your reflection smiled before you did. It lifted its hand as though to wave, but the hand on your side remained still. The reflection tapped its fingers against the glass, impatient, eager. You woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The lamp was out. The bulb burned to nothing. Morning brought little comfort. When you passed the hallway again, you couldn't help but glance at the mirror. Your reflection followed, as it should. But just before you stepped out of sight, you swore you saw its head turn toward you, watching, even as you walked away. You didn't dare check again. That night, the mirror called to you in dreams. The reflection leaned forward, lips pressed to the glass, whispering, in a voice identical to yours. Don't turn around. Look at me instead.
Chapter 5. Footsteps in Tandem. By now, you had stopped telling yourself the house was ordinary. Every creak, every sigh, every warped reflection was deliberate, too precise, too patient. But the footsteps were the worst. They had begun as faint echoes, half a beat behind your own, easy enough to dismiss in those first weeks. Now they were sharper, heavier, a rhythm trying to sync with yours. When you walked down the hall, the sound pressed at your heels, close enough to make you stumble. One evening, determined to prove you weren't losing your mind, you set a test. You walked the length of the upstairs hall, slowly at first. One step, pause. One step, pause. The echo followed, faithful, measured, matching every pause. Hello? You called, voice too loud in the empty house. Who's there? Silence. You tried again, softer this time. What do you want? The echo answered, but not with words. A deliberate step, loud, from directly behind you. You spun, heart in your throat. The hall was empty, dust motes drifting through a shaft of twilight. Still, the air felt occupied, thick as if with breath. That night, you lay in bed with the blanket pulled high, the lamp burning low. Hours ticked by, heavy with dread. And then, footsteps, slow, pacing the hall outside your door. Back and forth, back and forth. Your throat tightened. The sound went on so long it became maddening, as though whoever or whatever paced there had no need for rest. Finally, you whispered, trembling, "Please stop." The steps halted. Silence pressed in like weight. Then, a voice, muffled through the door, rasped, "Come walk with me." You clutched the blanket, shaking your head, though no one could see. "No!" The voice laughed, brittle as dry leaves. "Then I'll walk alone." The footsteps resumed, faster now, agitated, dragging across the boards. You pressed your palms to your ears, tears burning your eyes. The sound grew louder, closer, until it felt as though the pacing had moved into your room, though the door had never opened. And then, nothing. You dared to lower your hands, dared to breathe. The silence was almost worse, thick and waiting. A creak sounded at the edge of the bed. You whispered, "Don't turn around." The mattress sank, weight pressing beside your legs. The voice leaned close, so close you felt the cold of it brush your cheek. "Then walk in your dreams." You fell asleep without meaning to, terror blurring into unconsciousness. In the dream, you walked a hall much longer than your own. Footsteps echoed in tandem, never yours alone. When you stopped, the echo stopped. When you ran, it chased. The air was full of whispers, but one rose above the rest. "If you walk far enough, you'll find me." You awoke with your legs aching, as though you had been walking all night. When you looked down, dust clung to your feet.
Chapter 6. The Whispered Rules. You began to notice the patterns. The whispers came only after midnight. The footsteps never started until you had spoken aloud, even if it was only to yourself. The mirror in the hall grew restless if you stared too long, but ignored you if you passed in silence. Rules, unwritten, but binding. One evening you sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, scrawling thoughts by the light of a single bulb. Your handwriting shook with exhaustion. Don't turn around when it whispers. Don't speak after midnight. Don't look too long in mirrors. Don't answer its questions. You underlined the last one twice. The memory of the rasp outside your door, "Come walk with me," still gnawed at your spine. But that night, the entity seemed determined to test you. You woke to the sound of breathing again, close, in tandem with your own. Only this time the breaths came not from behind you, but from both sides, left, right, as though something leaned close on either side of your pillow. You clenched your eyes shut, your heart raced. Then came the whisper, doubled, one in each ear. "Do you want to know the rules?" You shook your head, fists tight around the blanket. You didn't answer. The whispers pressed closer, insistent, overlapping. "You already follow them. You already know.
You cannot leave unless you keep them. You cannot stay unless you break them. Tears burned your eyes. You whispered, barely audible, "Why me?" The voices fell silent. Then one, softer than before, replied, "Because you listened." You wanted to scream, but fear pinned you down. Instead, you whispered, "What happens if I break them?" The weight at the edge of the bed shifted. Something leaned closer. So near you felt the absence of heat, a void colder than breath. "Then you'll see me," it rasped. Silence stretched. Then slowly the voices began reciting rules you had not written. Never cover the mirror. Never sleep with the lamp burning. Never close the attic door once it opens. Your mind reeled. You wanted to cover your ears, but your arms refused to move. Never leave food uneaten. Never answer the one who knocks. Never look at the bed while you lie in it. Your throat closed with panic. You wanted to tell yourself it was a dream, but the chill soaking into your bones was too real. Finally, the voices fell silent, and the second breath returned, steady, patient, always half a second late. At last, exhaustion won. You slept, restless and thin. When morning came, you sat again at the table with your notebook. You flipped to the page where you had listed your rules, but the words were no longer yours. The handwriting had changed, slanted, sharp, gouged deep into the paper as if carved by something that had no patience for pens. The new list was longer, and some of the rules were ones you didn't remember hearing.
Chapter 7. Sleepless Hours. After the rules appeared in your notebook, sleep became a threat, not a reprieve, not rest, a trap. You decided you would not sleep, not tonight, not at all. You prepared like a soldier, brewed bitter coffee until the pot rattled, lined candles along your desk, sat upright in a chair instead of daring the bed. The house seemed to sense your defiance. It waited, quiet, as if listening. Midnight came. You sipped the last of your coffee, heart jittering, nerves raw. No whispers yet, no steps, just silence, heavy and suffocating. By 2 a.m., the silence grew louder. You hadn't thought silence could press against your skin, but it did, thick as fog, clinging, pushing. The floorboards groaned as though under invisible weight. A draft stirred, though every window was latched. The flame of your candle bent sideways, trembling. You whispered to yourself, desperate, "I won't sleep. I won't." That was the mistake. The footsteps began instantly, slow, measured, coming from the far end of the hall. You clutched the arms of the chair, knuckles pale. The steps grew closer, closer, until they stopped just outside your door. A long pause, then 3 knocks. Slow, hollow, patient. Your chest tightened. You remembered the rule, never answer the one who knocks. So you sat frozen, biting your tongue to hold back sound. The knocks came again, louder this time. Then a voice, muffled through the door. "You're awake." Your stomach turned to ice. You wanted to scream back, "No," but you knew better. The rule forbade it. The doorknob rattled. Metal clicked against wood, then silence. You thought it was over until you heard it, a scrape from beneath your chair, something moving under the floorboards, crawling, following the rhythm of your breathing. Your heart pounded so loud you thought it would give you away. You clamped a hand over your mouth, shivering. The crawling stopped directly beneath you. Then the voice came again, not from the hall this time, but from under your feet. "You can't stay awake forever." The candle guttered, smoke curling into the room. Darkness swelled. You lasted until dawn, somehow. Your body trembled with exhaustion, eyes raw and burning. The morning light crept through the curtains, pale and weak, but enough to scatter the presence pressing close all night. You staggered to the table, collapsed in the chair, and stared at your notebook. A new line had been scratched into the list of rules. Never stay awake past 3. Chapter 8. Faces in the Wood Grain. The house began speaking in new ways. It was subtle at first, a knot in the wood that looked vaguely like a twisted smile, a streak in the floorboard that might have been a shadow or a mouth. You convinced yourself it was imagination, tired eyes playing tricks. Until the night you were brushing your teeth and glanced at the bathroom doorframe. A face stared back at you. Not your own reflection, not even human. Eyes like hollow pits, crooked grins stretched across a wooden jaw. You froze, toothbrush dangling, heart slamming. When you blinked, it was gone. Only the grain of the door remained. You didn't sleep that night. You moved slowly through the house, running fingertips along the walls, tracing the grain in search of familiar patterns. But every plank had its own face, every beam its own sneer. You whispered to yourself, trying to hold on to reason. It's the house, it's the wood, it's just knots and shadows. But the house didn't listen. The second breath followed you from room to room, always just behind, always late. By midnight, you were in the parlor, hands pressed against the warped floorboards. You tried to convince yourself to sit, to rest, but the grain beneath your fingers writhed, subtly, impossibly. Faces emerged in relief, mouths opening and closing without sound, eyes narrowing, following your every movement. You flinched, recoiling. "Stop!" you shouted into the empty room. The house answered, not with wood, not with sound, but with a shift in the air. The faces moved closer, crowded along the walls, peeking from the beams overhead. You felt watched from every angle, the eyes turning toward your chest, your hands, your very thoughts. A whisper curled along the baseboards. "Look closer." You shook your head. "No, never." The whisper pressed harder. "You must see. You must learn." You turned your head slightly and glimpsed one of the faces emerging fully from the grain, lips parting as if to speak. Your stomach lurched. You fell backward, hitting the floor. The candle toppled, guttering out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then a new sound, the footsteps, not from the hall, but within the walls themselves, slow, deliberate, echoing from everywhere. A breath pressed against your neck. You stiffened, eyes shut tight. "Why do you hide?" the voice rasped. You swallowed, choking back terror. I don't want to see you." The weight shifted, brushing the small of your back, cold as marble, impossible as air. The whisper came again, patient, intimate. "You will. One day you will look, and then you will belong." Morning found you collapsed on the floor with notebook in hand. The wooden faces had vanished in the sunlight, or maybe they had never been gone. You didn't care to test. But the notebook, once again, bore a new rule. Never touch the walls after midnight. You didn't sleep that day either. Chapter 9. The Visitor at Midnight. By now, the nights had become battles. Sleep was a surrender. Darkness was a trap. Every shadow, every creak, every whisper was a challenge, a test, a reminder that the house had learned your patterns, and you could not outrun it. That night, you decided to confront it, or at least prepare for its arrival. You lined the walls of your room with candles, their flames trembling like tiny sentinels. You positioned your notebook in front of you, pen ready. You spoke aloud the rules over and over, as if repetition could ward off what waited. Midnight arrived. At first, there was silence. The second breath did not come. You dared a small smile. Perhaps the house was allowing reprieve. Then, a sound unlike any other. Slow footsteps, not echoing yours this time. Heavy, measured, approaching from the hallway. Your chest tightened. The doorknob rattled. Then the faintest scratch of something against the floor, deliberate, crawling closer. You whispered, voice shaking, "I'm awake. I'm ready." A shadow detached itself from the corner. Not fully solid, not fully absent, formed from darkness and air, shifting as though trying to define itself. Two glowing points, like coals, floated where eyes might be. Limbs were suggested, not real, and yet you knew it could touch you, follow you, copy you. "You're brave or foolish, time will tell," the voice whispered, rasping through the room. You swallowed. What are you?" The visitor tilted its head. The glowing points blinked like hesitant stars. "I am the watcher, the keeper, the one who follows when you breathe, who waits when you close your eyes. I am what the house remembers." You took a cautious step back. Your foot hit the edge of a candle, sending it clattering to the floor. Flames sputtered, smoke rose. The entity did not flinch. "You can't leave, and you cannot stay unless you obey." Your hands shook. Obey what? What do you want?" The form drifted closer, limbs stretching in impossible angles. "Only to be seen, only to teach. The rules are mine, the house is mine, and soon you will belong here with me." You pressed yourself against the far wall. "I won't belong, I won't." The second breath whispered against your ear, warm, patient, perfectly timed. You froze, understanding instantly. "You already belong," it said. The visitor moved in closer, just close enough to brush your hair, a cold wind, almost solid. You could see in fragments a pale face behind the shifting darkness, features only half formed, like a mask in decay. Eyes bright, teeth glinting. It smiled. "Sleep, dream, and I will visit you again." Exhaustion claimed you, and when you awoke, the visitor was gone. Only faint footprints pressed into the dust of your floor. Two sets again, yours and the echoes. The notebook bore a new line. "Never face the visitor completely." Chapter 10. Don't turn around. By now, the rules had grown longer than your patience. Every night, the house pushed you closer to exhaustion. Every reflection, every floorboard, every whisper reminded you of your place. A guest, a prisoner, a witness. But tonight, you could not resist. You sat on the edge of your bed, notebook open, candles guttering low. You read the rules aloud, voice steady despite the tremor in your hands. The second breath matched you perfectly, patient, echoing, taunting. A shadow pooled at the foot of the bed, heavier than any before. The visitor had returned. Its form was more defined now. Limbs hinted at muscle, hands like skeletal claws. The pale, half-formed face hovered just above your feet, eyes bright with something alive, teeth gleaming faintly. "Are you ready?" it rasped. You shook your head, but your voice trembled, betraying curiosity. I need to see." The entity laughed, a brittle, scraping sound. then you will. You forced yourself to rise. Candlelight trembled across the walls. Every plank, every grain, every shadow of the house seemed alive. The rules screamed in your mind. Never turn around. Never face completely. But curiosity, terrible, irresistible, tugged at your spine. You stepped backward, slow, careful, toward the hallway mirror. Your hands shook, clenching the notebook. You whispered to yourself, desperate, I will not turn. I will not look directly. The visitor floated closer, an impossible shadow brushing the edge of your vision. The second breath pressed near your ear. The whispers multiplied, layering over one another. Turn, look, belong. You froze. 1 step, 2 steps, a heartbeat. Then a voice, low and urgent. Don't turn around. You swallowed, breath trembling. Your reflection in the mirror shifted on its own. The half-formed face appeared behind you. Not your own, not the visitor, but something in between, watching, grinning, patient. It touched your shoulder, cold as marble. Your knees gave way. You fell to your hands and knees, clutching the floorboards. Every face in the wood grain, every warped reflection, every shadow of the house leaned closer. The voice rasped again, almost tenderly. Now you belong. Now you see. Now you cannot leave. You tried to resist, tried to scramble backward, away from the mirror, away from the faces, away from the shadow. But the weight of the house pressed in, heavy as water, rooting you to the spot. The second breath fell perfectly in sync with your own, a cruel echo that would never leave. Your eyes flicked to the reflection, and you saw it. A being formed entirely from shadow and splintered wood, its face human enough to terrify you, smiling because it had been waiting centuries for this moment. Limbs bending impossibly, stretching across the room, eyes that knew every rule you had tried to follow, every whispered plea you had made. Then came the last words, almost a caress. Welcome home. The house seemed to sigh. The floorboards creaked beneath every imagined weight. Dust swirled in a halo of cold light. And you understood. You'd belonged all along. You'd just never looked. When dawn broke, the bed was empty. Footprints marked the floor, 2 sets trailing toward the hallway mirror. But the mirror was blank. The faces in the wood grain were gone. The house waited. And somewhere, just beneath the ceiling, a slow, steady breath matched the rhythm of the morning wind.